We don't often understand the far-reaching repercussions and implications of complicated issues like war or even climate change. But let me give you one example to help you understand this better. In today's day and age, in a lot of our homes where we eat roti as a staple food, the cost of it has gone up. हमारे देश के घरों में रोटी बनाना महंगा हो गया है और दुनिया के बहुत देशों में तो रोटी मिलना भी मुश्किल हो गया है. It's even become difficult for nations to find enough wheat to feed their population right now. Why is this happening? Two key reasons: war, the Russia-Ukraine war, and climate change, the intense heat wave, the drought that many of the nations are facing, including the heat wave in India, is impacting your food production. Today in this edition of Simplified, we're going to talk about one of the biggest issues in the world right now, the global wheat crisis. Remember this, it's not just about India, but across the world. So I'm going to first start up with the global picture and give you some numbers, some statistics to help you really understand what the situation is. For example, 25% of the world's import of wheat comes from two nations, Russia and Ukraine. Two nations which are currently embroiled in a war which has now gone on for months. Two nations who are right now not being able to export or have chosen not to export wheat. A fourth of this world's wheat actually comes from these two nations. 40% rise in global prices since this war has begun. 40% rise in the global wheat prices. In India itself, numbers and estimates vary. Some say 5%, some even say 15% of India's total wheat crop may actually get impacted, hit, damaged, production get lowered by almost 10% because of the heat wave, because of the early summer and the extreme temperatures that we are looking at. 19 million tons of wheat is currently being stocked, already in stock in India, and I'm not even talking about the current crop. 19.34% rise in daily average wheat price if you compare it to last May. So not just the global price rise just this year, and even in comparison to last May, what you and I use, the daily wheat price, that also has seen almost a 20% jump. 7.79% is the consumer inflation, the latest data that came in, that gives you a sense of just how expensive food is, including your atta. This, by the way, is a 8-year high. So inflation, mehengai, on top of that, a food inflation and a wheat crisis is a global story. Now, in this scenario, let's talk about what the Indian government has said and why suddenly India has grabbed global headlines from a policy decision which is for our country impacting the wheat prices so much that today the global wheat prices have touched a record high. So the 5 big developments, if we had to say, the Indian government on Friday announced that they're going to ban wheat exports. Now this is not a blanket overarching ban. There are some terms and conditions which are existing here. Immediately as this announcement was made, there was massive backlash from several of the countries across the world, entities, institutions, even the groups like G20, G7 actually condemned this move, saying it is going to further worsen the global crisis. The India came back and then clarified further by saying, look, we are not taking away food from the countries who need it. If there is a food country which is in need of wheat, we will continue to give it to them. But we need to look out for our own people, ensure our own food security, and we are not going to go back on the contracts that we have already made. We are going to honor those contracts. So that is the clarification that India has come up with to say, well, it's not a blanket ban and there is a justified reason behind it. We will discuss about that in just a bit. Meanwhile, the government has also asked the states to extend the wheat procurement to pick up more wheat from the market and do so up until 31st of May. Why is that important? Also, we'll explain to you in some time. But many are saying this is a big U-turn. It has surprised and shocked many that the government, which was pitching to the world that we want to be, feeders to the entire world, is now saying we don't want to export wheat at all in the current scenario. We will think about it later. And there are three examples that I'll give you why people are now confused and are calling this a U-turn. First example is what Food Secretary of our country, the Union government, said as recent as May 5th, which is when he said we don't see a case for any kind of control on exports. Wheat exports are on. In fact, the government is facilitating traders. So because the prices were rising globally, India wanted to take advantage of that. We were actually trying to export more wheat and take advantage of the big demand, less supply, rising prices across the world. And this is what the government has been saying so far. Even if you look at the statement that the Food Minister Piyush Goyal made on April 15th, he went on to say that our farmers have ensured that our granaries are overflowing and we are ready to serve the world. He was actually taking cue from what Prime Minister Modi had said just a couple of days before that, when he said that India has offered and wants to offer to supply food to the world if the WTO permits. Obviously, for you to suddenly ramp up your exports, there are certain rules and regulations that the World Trade Organization has set up as to how countries should conduct trade between them, and those would had to be sorted before India could actually ramp up its export further. Now, again, let's come back to the basics. Why should you and I care? What's going on? Why is it being called a global wheat crisis? And why did our government suddenly change its stand and view as far as exporting wheat is concerned? To put this in perspective, I've got Devinder Sharma, food policy analyst, who is joining us right now. Mr. Sharma, thank you for speaking with us. Let's start with how you view the government's change. Many experts had been saying that government will have to relook its policy of exporting more and more, and at some point maybe bring in some curbs. So are you glad that this decision has been made now?
Yes, I am very glad that this decision has been made, because for quite some time, when you quoted the food secretary saying that we have enough stocks and we can export, even at that time I was asking for that the government should have a clamp down in the sense that we regulate how much quantity we want to export, because we are and we can be in a serious crisis in the days to come or in the months to come. So a little bit of a mistake here to not judge exactly as to how much stocks we have and how much is the requirement for domestic food supplies and so on can land us in trouble. A. B is we have seen the wheat prices going up over the last few months. I would say even before the war it had begun. So the prices were going up, and the government of course was worried, because price rise as far as staple food is concerned is a factor which can bring down governments anywhere in the world. So that is something which the government was aware of. And I think this turnaround that you talk about, this U-turn that you mentioned, which is clearly visible. After all, a few weeks back, the Prime Minister says that we are in a position to feed the world, and suddenly then the government, tries to ensure that we don't export, let's say, except for some quantities that you mentioned with some riders. But yes, I think it was a very well taken decision, even though it was late. Why I am saying this, Tanvi, is because a similar wheat blunder that we avoided now could be a learning for us, because in 2005-2006, the government of India had allowed private trade to buy wheat directly from farmers. The private trade moved in and mopped up large quantities. Now, what happens is when the government sat down to find out how much is the PDS requirement and the availability of grain for PDS, it realized that it didn't have enough grain. And when it asked the companies to tell us as to how much quantity they were stocking, they refused to divulge that data. And then the government had to step in and import in the next 2 years 7.1 million tons of wheat, which was the largest wheat import at that time in the world. And this was done just 1 year prior to the global food crisis, which erupted in 2007-2008. So luckily, we escaped that kind of a turmoil that could have happened in India. And this 7.1 million ton that we imported was at prices double than what we had paid to our farmers here. So it became a kind of a scandal. And I remember the BJP at that time was demanding a CBI inquiry into it. Now, the point that we need to understand is today, if we had exported the way we were trying to export, unbridled wheat exports, we could have landed into that situation very easily. And then in that period of time, 2006, 2007, we at least went globally and bought 7.1 million tons. Today, if we stand with a begging bowl, there is no wheat available, across the globe. So I think it was a very timely decision, and I think we must see through it why it was important. For any country, ensuring food security of its population is the first priority.
Yes, you're absolutely right. So the government is telling us that this decision has been made to ensure that the prices at home come down. The rising prices of wheat, atta, even at the retail level comes down and brings about some relief in the food inflation also. The government is also saying that obviously, like you rightly pointed out, every country has to watch out and ensure that people in their own country have enough to eat. Food security, as it's called, and we need to ensure that we have enough for us, and the government says we will give it to people who are in dire needs, nations which are in dire need of food, we will give it to them, and it will not impact our prior contracts. But I want to also add one more to these three reasons that the government gave, and you spoke about it, Mr. Sharma, when you said some mistakes or wrongly estimating what our stocks are and what our production could be. Now, one obviously would have been that we estimated the production to be huge, but a heat wave hit us, and that's going to now reduce the amount of wheat production we will see this season. But are there also other problems that exist because of which we got this wrong estimate?
Yes, you are very right. The earlier estimates were that, of course, the wheat production, there is a shortfall because of the rising temperatures. We know that from 111 million tons, that was our target for this year. They revised the data and now it is 105 million tons. But I guess they realized later that even this is not going to be a correct estimate. And in the days to come, in the months to come, or when the season ends, we will realize that the shortfall was much bigger. If you ask trade in India, they are telling us that the production would be somewhere around 95 million tons. So we can hope and wait that perhaps the estimates that we had were not correct. A. B. It is very evident that the estimates they fear now, the government fears now, need to be what should I say? They know for sure that the production is not going to be up to the mark, and so they want to take all precautions to see that whatever is in the mandis should be into the coffers of the government. Why I'm saying this is, look at it. We know that the temperature, the rise had suddenly led to shriveling of grains. We all know that in Punjab, the estimates are based on crop cutting experiments. It tells us that 5 quintals per acre was the loss the farmers incurred on an average. Now, that is what brought down the production estimates to 105 million tons. Now, interestingly, the government was under pressure all these days that their normal stocking is limits, and the quality criteria tells us that 6% of shriveling of grains is allowed, but the farmers were demanding it to be raised to 12%. And this quantity is lying in the mandis. It was awaiting orders from the government accepting it, for the buffer stocks or for the PDS and so on, or for the procurement. Now, the interesting part is the government has, leveraged it, or let's say extended that limit to 18%, which says very clearly that the government knew that even 18% shriveling is okay because we need to build up on our food stocks. A. B is that the government also has now extended the procurement season till May or May 31st, and at the end of this month. The idea being that those who had stocked the grain with them, there are about 1% of the farming population in India which had the ability to stock some quantity of grain, hoping that they will get a higher price and that has become a big issue now, as you know. But all estimates tell us that not more than 1 million ton is lying stocked with these farmers who want to take advantage of it in the next few months. But the point is, the government has extended this procurement season so that these people can bring back that produce into the mandi, so at least they get the minimum support price, which is 2015 rupees per quintal. So both these development tell us that the government, perhaps in their own wisdom or in their own understanding now in their own analysis, now realize that the severity of the crisis may be much bigger than what they had imagined earlier.
Okay, so and correct me if I'm wrong in understanding what you're also saying, is that on one hand, of course, the government needs to ensure that we have enough for ourselves, that there were perhaps many in the market who were hoarding the production to get a better price internationally because they were able to export, and the government has now said, okay, you can't export. But we are going to extend our procurement. We will buy more. We have asked all the states to buy more and stock it up for the needs of our own country. But there is a certain would that be the correct understanding of what you were saying right now, Mr. Sharma?
Yes, you are right, because they realize, the government realizes that these people are not happy. Of course, they wanted the trade to come and buy from them when the prices go up, in the months to come. And the government realizes that they're going to be the loser. So the best way is at least to extend the procurement season, so these people can at least get that minimum support price, assured price that the government had promised.
Yes. So now let me bring in a counter view to this, which I heard many say in the last couple of days, is that the government is again, taking a decision which doesn't go in the interest of the farmers. That the one opportunity that the farmers had to perhaps make use of the rising global prices and make some money has also now been taken away from them. What would you say to that?
Well, I'm very, 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 I would say, unhappy when this kind of argument is made, because, this is not market reform. This is just one of a time or case study that we must try to understand. War in some part of the world has made, our wheat competitive, quote unquote. Now, this is no reform. Let me make it very clear. So, once in a while you get this opportunity, but I would rather look for a bigger reform or a set of reforms which ensures that the farmers get a higher price, irrespective of whether there's a war happening in one part of the world or not. That is something which we should have attempted. And those people who are now saying, oh, we have lost the opportunity, let me tell you one thing very interesting. In India, the wheat harvesting season begins from central India, Madhya Pradesh. And then it gradually comes to Rajasthan, to Uttar Pradesh, to Haryana, and then eventually to Punjab, and in the end, Amritsar, the extreme in Punjab, bordering Pakistan.
Yes.
But the point is, 95% of wheat harvest and the selling has been done. So farmers have actually got what they were supposed to get, whether it was procurement or whether a higher price by the trade. Okay. So they have already got it. Now, the point I'm making is only if 1 million ton is what has been stocked, I don't think it is that big a loss that we should be all talking about it. Oh my God, as if, out of the 105 million tons, if 1 million ton is what is, being kept by some farmers for speculation in the days to come, I don't think this is a market reform that we should be very proud of. So all I'm saying is that luckily, unluckily, it's very good that the ban came at a stage when the bulk of the wheat was already purchased from the farmers. Okay. So they have got the benefit of the price.
Right. So now from that, I want to take 3 steps back and make it a larger conversation. And my last question to you is about, what is happening across the world, and try and understand it from a global perspective. And I just want to take our viewers through some of those highlights and reiterate what I said initially also. In the global wheat crisis, the supply has been massively hit for the entire world because 2 of the biggest exporters, Russia and Ukraine, are embroiled in a war, which is why Ukraine has not been able to export all of the wheat that it produces. Russia is also choosing to keep some of its wheat back right now for domestic needs, and as a result, 1/4 of the overall world supply has been hit. Global prices are up 40% since this war began. And then came the heat wave that impacted the production in countries like India. So India is actually the 2nd largest producer of wheat in the world. we're just not that big on the export front as some of the other countries, simply because we end up consuming so much of it ourselves, and there are many inefficiencies in the system otherwise as well, which is why we don't usually turn up in the first 2-3. But because there was a problem right now, the Indian government did want to take advantage of that and was actually emerging as a preferred supplier for many of the other countries who were struggling. So let's take a look at some of the countries that did get badly hit when it comes to their wheat supply because of the Russia-Ukraine war. Right on top of the list is Egypt. Egypt's 85% of their wheat supply actually comes from Ukraine and Russia. So imagine what kind of a problem they were in. Egypt then just last month actually got into a contract with India to source a large amount of wheat from us. This was one of the decisions that was also pushed by the government to say, look, this is how we are helping the world. Then there is Yemen, Lebanon. 40-50% of their wheat needs actually come again from these two countries which are embroiled in a war. Turkey, Bangladesh, Sudan, Nigeria, many other African nations, again, the ones who've been badly hit. So if you actually see, it's some of the poorer nations and the underdeveloped nations that have actually been badly hit with this global wheat crisis. Add to that entire problem that countries like China or United States can continue to buy more and more wheat and hoard it for themselves for when things may get tough, which is where the debate then comes in. What should you do? How do you deal with this situation? If you are an exporter, if you're an importer, if you're a wheat producing country, then what should your strategy be? And to that I come back to you, Mr. Devinder Sharma, because many of the experts believe that in such times we should not be putting in bans, we should not be limiting, our aid to the world, but we should be expanding it. That bans is not the way to go forward. But while theoretically that sounds extremely good, human rights wise, what we are actually looking at is more and more countries coming in with such curbs. Indonesia has gone ahead to even ban other exports. So what should our policy be?
I'm so glad that you gave an overview, which is very essential, for everyone to understand. And I think it is important also to know, in addition to it, that in 2022, the world is actually witnessing a food crisis, a global food crisis. This is third in this series since the first world food crisis happened in 2007-2008. In 2007-2008, there were no shortfall in food production, but commodity trading and speculation led to a situation that 37 countries had to face food riots. India escaped that food riot situation because we were not globally integrated. We were not integrated into the international markets the way we did try, or we were trying till recently. Now, having known that and having understood that fact, I think what is happening today is, as you rightly mentioned, 53 countries are faced with the crisis situation. And that, of course, starts from Egypt to Turkey to Sudan and so on and so forth. Now, 53 countries, 200 million people roughly pushed below the hunger line. And that is the global crisis. But interestingly, the point that we need to understand is that even without the war happening, or let's say before the war, the prices had actually shot up and, crossed that level that the world had achieved in 2007-2008. So which actually means that we were actually into the world food crisis without the war also. The war has added on to it. Now, interestingly, what has happened is, according to the World Bank, if you look into the agriculture price index that the World Bank comes out every month, the April index tells us that the global wheat prices have gone up by 60% in the 1 year. Now, 60% prices going up is a big jump, and any trader would love to take advantage of it. So that is one factor that we must know. The other part is that given this situation, now let us say India exports whatever it had to export, or let's say empties its stocks. But please tell me, when India is in the need, or when India stands with a begging bowl next year, will there be any country showing that human rights concern to come and help us get over that crisis? The answer is no. So I think what China is doing, or what United States is doing, is there's nothing wrong in it. China has China has 650 million tons of food surplus at the moment. The stocks are 650 million tons. Why? Because they know that it is important at this particular juncture to keep that food with them. In India, I don't understand. Just because the trade interest is to make profit, it's like greed, I would say. So they are greedy. I can understand because the global prices have gone up by 60%. But I think we don't use the human rights concern as if oh, the world needs it, so we need to export. You're not giving it free. You're going to make profits out of it, and exorbitant profits, I must say. So I think this argument still is not valid. It is very well cleverly done to give an impression to the liberals. Liberals give an impression to the others as if they are being so concerned about humanity and food security and so on. I think it is very important for every country to be food secure, and it is very clear that the decision taken by Government of India is very important. Let me take you just to give you a little historical perspective. Egypt is in a crisis. 82% of its wheat is coming from that region that we talked about, the war region. And why Egypt is still, importing so much of food grains, knowing that it is a staple food, it is their mistake. Whatever reasons they were doing it. Remember, when the Roman Empire was at its peak, and Cleopatra was one of those persons who was sought after by the Roman emperors, that was primarily because Egypt carried that surplus for Rome. Today, this situation has turned around. It is Europe which is going to feed Egypt. So I think Egypt has to make up for what it had neglected all these years. Now, similarly with other countries, all I'm saying is that the message from this issue or this issue of food security or this crisis that the world is faced with is very clear. Every country must try to become food secure.
Yes.
Must try to become food self-sufficient. To rely on supply chains which are competitive, international supply chains which are competitive was a mistake, and every country should now pick up the courage and to redesign their agriculture model in a manner that they become self-sufficient. They don't have to depend on anybody else.
Okay.
And also,
yes.
And also, just 1 minute.
Yeah.
And also, I think be very clear that India in 2007, 2008 escaped the crisis because it was not, globally integrated. And even now, in 2022, we have escaped the crisis because we are not globally integrated, which means we are insulated. That is what I think is a model for the rest of the world. Yes. Let us try to be food.
So actually, I was going to ask you that because you started off by giving us example of what happened in 2005, 2006, where by the end of it, we had to import wheat for our own needs. But you also said how we managed to then afterwards subsequently escape the global food crisis. The world is facing another one. We may escape that as well. When will we know with better estimates, calculation, the current wheat production and the procurement done? By when will we have a better picture of if we've actually evaded the wheat crisis for our own country this year?
Well, by the end of June, let's say, when the season ends, we would be quite clear as to what exactly are our production figures, how much we have incurred a shortfall in productivity and so on. All these things will be clear by then. I hope so. And then the government would realize, and since the government has already left a little bit of a gap in its order, saying that, it can be country to country, the request can be addressed and so on and so forth. I think the government will have an opportunity. If it has a surplus, it should sell. Nobody's against that. But the point is, please be sure that if you, in the next 1 year, anything can go wrong. The temperature, the weather, the monsoon, and we can be, back staring at a kind of a food crisis, which the world is staring at now. Yes. So we cannot be standing with a food bowl the next year. I think that is something, a begging bowl, let's say, to standing next year. And at that time, there will be no supplies from anywhere. So I think we have to prepare.
Because almost every country that can is actually hoarding, stocking up right now in anticipation of things to get worse, and which is what we need to do. For that, we need first a reality check of what is our current situation and what will it be by end of June. Thank you so much, Mr. Devinder Sharma, for joining us and helping us put this entire issue in perspective. Let me quickly recap it for our viewers. The government of India had to bring in an export ban, which is not a blanket export ban, which we will continue to honor the contracts we've already gotten into. If we've made promises, we will also continue to, if needed, give it to some of the countries who are in dire need of wheat basis how much we have. But first up, we need to get a sense of how much stocks do we actually have, and if our calculations on that were correct, and if our estimates actually match with the final wheat production, considering that this heat wave has really brought about a big scare, and there is a possibility that 5 to 10 to 15% of the production may get impacted. We need to see. So the government is stepping up on procurement. It wants all of the wheat which is available to be out there in the market. It wants to pick up as much as it can to keep it for our own country's food security, to ensure everybody has enough to eat in our own country in the next 1 year, and we don't have to go around importing and begging to the rest of the world. And once we have a clearer picture on that, if there is space left, then we will continue to export it further. That's where we're coming from. Maybe we jumped too soon and spoke too soon in the last 1 month when we said we wanted to feed the world. We first should have gotten an insight into what our own situation was, but we seem to be doing now, and that's where things stand right now. I hope that was helpful to you. Thank you so much for joining us on this edition of Simplified.